on the other side of the hill. And today we're talking about creating cognitive flexibility in students and how parents can encourage students' academic life or their pursuit of academic excellence through executive functioning. Now, that might be a lot of buzzwords if you're not familiar with this topic, but I'm sure that you'll get a handle on them after this presentation. So without further ado, we'll launch in. And so again, my name's Caitlin. I am a Stanford alumni. I was a Wu Tsai Neuroscience Institute fellow at Stanford, and I'm really passionate about accessibility, neurodiversity, education, and child development. And then at the Center for Developing Minds, I'm an educational specialist, specializing in executive functioning and helping students with ADHD, autism, and other learning differences thrive and really realize their academic potential and personal potential. I also coach parents on how to help foster growth mindset in their children. Our talk today is structured in the sense of an overview of executive functioning and then how cognitive flexibility really fits into that, and we'll have some Q&A time at the end. But a little bit more about me. I hold a bachelor's of science in human biology with a specialization in cognitive neuroscience and a master's in sociology with a specialization in the sociology of education. And so this meeting is being recorded, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to listen in and download if you need to have a little bit of a refresher after. Our talk for today is again about executive functioning, and why we're focusing on cognitive flexibility is that we want to emphasize to our students to work smarter and not harder. There's ways to promote organizational thinking in the home that will prevent some of these emotional regulation breakdowns. Often they're called meltdowns or shutdowns in this age group specifically. And by promoting cognitive flexibility, we can try to deter some of that behavior. The thing is, there's some caveats. There's no silver bullets if your student struggles with executive functioning or cognitive flexibility. You really need to take some of the things that we talked about today as an a la carte presentation, as I like to say. Take what you want, combine that in your home and at school, and a lot of it's going to be an experimental science of figuring out what does and doesn't work for your child. So hopping into our overview of executive functioning, it's a super hot word right now out on the press. And what exactly is it? Well, I like to use this diagram. In my opinion, this diagram should really be shaped like a pyramid, because on the left, the ones labeled 1, 2, and 3, which is impulse control, emotional control, and flexible thinking, that is the base of our pyramid for executive functioning. And if we don't have good impulse control as a child, emotional control as a child, and flexible thinking, it's going to be super hard to start developing skills in planning and prioritizing tasks, especially ones we don't want to do, starting tasks, otherwise known as task initiation, and overall just being an organized human being. Whether you're a kindergartner, a fifth grader, or an eighth grader, you have to develop your skill set in executive functioning. We're not just naturally born experts in any of these things. And so cognitive flexibility, obviously it falls into the category of flexible thinking, but I put a little gold star on there because I also think that it relies upon working memory a little bit. So access to memories and coping strategies in the moment when we're feeling frustrated. So we want to make sure that our mental dry erase board allows students to do more than one thing at a time. And it really powers this organization, shifting, which I'll get a little bit into later in the talk, planning, and this task initiation. And if I didn't cover it already, since we don't have a chat, if you have any questions, Please hold your questions till the end. We're going to enable the raise your hand feature and you can ask your question. But in case you fear you might forget it, I really invite you to either write it down on notes on your phone, a Google Doc, something, so you can still absorb more information coming at you and not forget your question. But that is a overview of the base foundations of executive functioning. So we have that impulse control, emotional control, and flexible thinking. Beyond that, as students get older, they start to sharpen skills in working memory, self-monitoring, which is self-awareness, planning and prioritizing. So as your student gets older, you want them to take more and more responsibility for what's going on in their life and more independence in prioritizing what is important to them. And then lastly, task initiation, which might be starting a chore, starting an essay, starting dinner for the family, and really envelopes anything that could be a preferred or a non-preferred task. Most of the time, students have a hard time starting things they don't want to do, not things they do want to do. And lastly, organization. So this is both physical organization, maybe a messy desk, messy backpack, messy room, and also mental organization. So remembering things about people, maybe keeping track of a certain friend's favorite ice cream flavor or things like that. Little things that you want to keep in your mental catalog in your mind. And that is executive functioning in a nutshell. There's much more, but that will be our overview for today. Our learning objectives for this chat is they're really centered on being practical for you and coming away with some tools. So understanding and appreciating the value of cognitive flexibility, also known as flexible thinking. Recognizing at least one area that you can improve your own or your child's cognitive flexibility. And number 3, implementing one strategy that I suggest to create more flexible thinking in that area. So we're covering relevance, identification, and practical use. I hope that's what you come away with from this talk. Our framework about this is really centered on the value of cognitive flexibility. Why does this matter in our life? And I like to give a little bit of a definition. So cognitive flexibility, it's all about your brain's ability to adapt to new, changing, or unplanned events. When I was a child, I really struggled with a change in plans. If I had a play date with a friend or something planned with a friend, and then day of they canceled, my entire day was ruined. I needed to work on my ability to kind of take in new information, process it, and be okay with it and accept it. And if that's your child, then this is a really good thing to start thinking about. And I like to talk about it or frame it in the scenario of bowling. So I hope everyone's had a chance to bowl in their life. It's pretty fun. I've met some pretty good bowlers, and I've met some bowlers that are all right. They have some things that they have to work on. And often those bowlers, the ones that need to work on some skills or some key elements of bowling, are ones that are really, really good at just chucking the ball down the lane straight and hitting with enough force to knock over as many pins as possible. Where they're not so good at bowling is when they split the pins, or maybe there's some pins on one side and then there's a lagger on the left side, and they got to do some sort of, a little bit more spin, a little bit more nuance to hit those extra pins over. They don't have enough skill, or what I like to make a metaphor as cognitive flexibility, to try to hit all of those pins over. And sometimes if you're playing more beginners bowling, there's bumpers in the lane. And if you are not flexible, you will not use the bumpers. And if you are flexible, you might use the bumpers and might more successfully knock over some more pins. And so what we're trying to foster in children is an ability to accept help and use the bumpers when you need them, develop skills to hit all the bowling pins down, no matter how you split the pins, and also hit the pins with enough force to knock some down. So that's how I like to think about developing this cognitive flexibility piece. Why does it matter though? It matters because you'll need cognitive flexibility in academics, in social life, and in life skills. So, three extremely important areas. A tool I like to use to think about cognitive flexibility is called a mood meter. And it's a little numerical way to think about how our emotions become increasingly elevated, especially in a time when you're not being cognitively flexible. So this is my own mood meter of cognitive inflexibility. My number one is I'm just getting really stuck, and I'm struggling to transition between tasks. As an adult, I really struggle from coming home from work and doing the dishes. I don't transition between that very well. For a child, it might look similar. Coming home from school, maybe they want to play some video games. And then after video game time, we got to transition to homework. And that's when we're getting stuck, right? Maybe there's some altercations, some arguments, some bartering, some bargaining about what's going to happen next. And slowly you figure you're going from a 1 up until a 5. My 5 looks like full blown avoidance. I'm perseverating about what I have to do, and I'm ruminating, meaning I can't stop thinking about what went wrong. And for a child, honestly, it looks very similar. They might not have the words to describe what's going on, but not being able to move on from something that was unfair, a task they really, really don't want to do, homework that's weeks overdue, but needs to be turned in. And so starting to work with your child on making something that shows them that they don't go from 1 to 5 without hitting 2, 3, and 4 in between. I work with a lot of kids who think that they go 0 to 60, and that's really not the case. You have to figure out the small little behaviors in between that might be little clues for you to go, hey, I need to use a coping strategy right now, or an executive functioning skill right now, so I can regulate myself. The mood meter is a really great tool for that. Now, the process, the areas of cognitive inflexibility, this is the identification piece I mentioned earlier. So figuring out, where exactly do I get stuck? Is my child similar, or is my child different? And so there's several areas. The first one that I will talk about is called categorizing. Categorizing is just as it sounds. It means sorting or finding out the different or similar characteristics to put something into a group. An example of cognitive inflexibility in this area is when you're struggling to make a yes or no decision. Am I getting rid of this piece of clothing, or am I keeping it? Am I getting rid of this stuffed animal, or am I keeping it? And struggling to sort things into a respective bin based off of a set of characteristics. It's often associated with maybe slower processing speed or even anxiety. Sequencing, on the other hand, is focused on combining things in a particular order. So an example of inflexibility here would be a failure to recognize that the first step in a sequence affects the last step. And you might not have a good understanding of the overall big picture. Prioritizing is arranging items and activities in order of importance relative to each other. And in children, their priorities are different than adults. Their brain is still developing. And we have to understand that playtime or talking to friends is developmentally appropriate and probably what's most important to them. But an example of inflexibility would be a failure to recognize that if you're feeling unwell about how you're doing in a class and you voice that, and you still aren't able to make the connection that staying up late on Discord or texting really might be affecting how you perform on an upcoming test or your ability to even retain what's in class. I have a lot of students who, they tell me they really want to do better, but they're not making a connection between their actions yet. And so as parents, we want to step in and help them and bridge the gap between, hey, this is the behavior that I'm seeing. These are the results that you're telling me that you're getting. And how are we together going to get you to the place that you said you wanted to be at? That's prioritizing. Inhibiting is being able to control one's attention, behavior, thoughts, and emotions to override an impulse. Often, when we're anxious or are trying to avoid feelings we dislike, especially about work, homework, we aren't able to control our impulsive behaviors towards technology, eating, listening to music, seeing friends. Even though we know that there's other things that we should be doing at the moment, we engage in the behavior that we're using as a self-soothing mechanism. And so working on trying to inhibit that initial knee-jerk reaction of, oh, I'd much rather do this easier activity than this harder activity I know is on my checklist, is something that we actively need to work on in order to improve our executive functioning skills in the category of inhibiting. The last area of inflexibility is called shifting. And that is moving your attention between one task to another, or transitioning from one task to another. I already said earlier that I struggled with cognitive rigidity or cognitive inflexibility. They're often described the same thing. And my classic example is in college, I found myself really struggling to transition from my classroom environment. And then because you don't have your classes back to back to back in college like you do in elementary through high school, I found myself having to go from, okay, I'm in study mode. Now I'm in some sort of, I got to go eat, I got to go clean my room, I got to go see my friends, and then I have another class several hours later. It's hard to transition. And so in younger children, shifting would be looking like struggling from transitioning between home and school, maybe different settings, from going out to dinner to shopping to back at home. It could be from shifting from that video game scenario I said earlier, coming back into a non-preferred task. And so working on shifting between tasks that we do like, tasks we don't like, tasks in different types of settings is really important in building a robust executive functioning profile. So the 5 ones that we have for actual areas we want to identify strengths and weaknesses in are as follows: categorizing, sequencing, prioritizing, inhibiting, and shifting. Okay. How I like to think about this is thinking about moments of stress. And this is a classic eustress curve. Eustress is the good stress or the optimum amount of stress people experience that makes you feel energized and focused. And sometimes people even call it flow state. It's at the top of the curve where the smiley face is. It's where we feel like we're in our stretch zone. We're in our comforting stage, but we're a little bit past that because we're also learning and absorbing new things that stretch our brains and make us grow. On the other side, on the left-hand side, we have a state called no stress. And the problem when we're in our no stress zone is we feel unstimulated, disengaged, and we enter into something called the slug state, which I will talk about a little bit later in the next slide. And so when we're in a no stress zone, your child might be bored or super comfortable. And I like to think about it with my students as saying, hey, you just ate your delicious favorite meal and your stomach is super full. And you don't really feel like doing anything other than relaxing in your bed or on your couch, maybe watching a show. And when you're in this state, it's going to be very difficult to transition back to something that requires more energy And so that can range from ranging from exercise to homework, right? In contrast, on the right-hand side, past this eustress smiley face, we have distress. And that's when we experience burnout, fatigue, exhaustion. We're not doing well. And it's not a sustainable state. It's what you want your child to avoid. And this is when I see a lot at the end of the semester, students breaking down. They've been procrastinating on work. There's a huge mountain of it, and they feel overwhelmed. And that's when we're entering into this distress. We got to figure out what coping mechanisms and what plan can we put in place to fix that. So with eustress, we want to stay in this stretch zone of optimum stress. We want our child to be energized, focused, entering in a flow state. And this type of state is achievable at different times of day. Some students do better in the morning, achieving a eustress state. Some students benefit in the evening in a eustress state. So think about how that applies to your child, their schedule, and how do you craft an environment that promotes eustress, not boredom or strain. The slug state that I mentioned is one of the major challenges I see. When you continuously procrastinate, you go from your non-preferred task of homework into your preferred task. It might be playing, it could be video gaming, it could be texting, it could be hanging out in our room. We are lowering our energy to a state that it's going to be really hard to climb back out of that if we sit in that state for too long. So I always tell students, try to get home, and if your schedule allows, have some decompression time of about an hour and a half, and then really start thinking and evaluating in your mind what you have to do for the day. It's better to start earlier rather than later, because as we wind down for sleep, we are going to struggle to summon the amount of energy we need to do the tasks that we still have on our plate for the day, which is often homework, chores, and things that aren't as fun as going on our phone or playing with our favorite toy, right? So avoiding the slug state as much as possible, and trying to land in that eustress smiley face part of the curve, to be in the optimal zone for our working time. Slug state is totally fine at the end of the day when you've gotten all of your stuff done, but you want to make it easier on you so you don't have to crawl back up that graph of a hill right into eustress again. It will be very difficult to do that. We can cover a little bit of strategies to get from slug state into eustress state if people have questions about that in the question time. But otherwise, I want to talk a little bit about the domain areas to target specifically for academics and executive function. How I break this down is thinking about this in the before, during, and after stages. So when we're thinking about our academic work, before we even start it, we want to plan our work. How are we going to prioritize what we have to do? Where are we going to do our work? How are we going to do our work? What do we need to complete our work? That's the before stage. During is the how we complete our work in the sense of, taking breaks, the physical materials behind the work. Are we working on an iPad? Are we working on paper? And so we want to think about if we're working with friends or alone, and do we need access to certain types of information the teacher gave us? So that's the during component. After is thinking about how we iterate on our work. As students get older, the amount of times they need to expose themselves to the material to gain mastery over the subject or topic increases. So you have to iterate. So you take notes once, then you revisit your notes or you revise your notes. That's iteration. And then after would be managing our work, making sure things were correctly graded, turned in, and we want to follow up in case, we didn't do as well as we wanted to, communicating that to the teacher, especially for our older students. That's building self-advocacy. So telling your child that while we're engaging with our work, we have the before, during, and after steps. What's different about each of those steps, and how are we going to make sure that at the end of the day, we have all of the work that we were expected to complete done, and it's been double checked? I found that breaking it down in this way really helps students gain not just better content knowledge from a memorization and flexible, adaptable thinking lens, but also is building in that executive functioning component of, I understand what it takes to finish a project from start to finish. And there's been a lot more success when students think about it in this way. Now, some solidified tools I'd like to get into with you all involve strategies to improve this cognitive flexibility that I've been talking about. First one up is one of my favorites. It's a fun mishmash of words. It's called a STRABIT, and that combines a structure and a habit. Structure is just as it sounds. It's the arrangement of parts, the elements or constituents in an organized way. It forms equal functions. So think about a bookcase. A bookcase is a structure for books. That's its function. A habit, on the other hand, is this settled regular tendency. It's an automatic response, and it could be a routine. So brushing your teeth, right? A STRABIT combines both, and it's a combination that allows you to take often an item or a sort of ritual into a certain time of day or a certain place in your home. Classic example is when you go back to your house, you're going to go put your keys in a certain spot. For me, it's a little dish by my front door. That is a STRABIT. The initial action that sparked my brain to do that STRABIT is coming through my door with my keys in my hand because I just got out of my car. And, oh, where am I going to put them? I'm going to put them in my dish, because if I have them in my dish, I know where they are in the morning when I'm doing the opposite, but same thing, going out my door to go for work. I know, hey, it's in my dish. I can find it. So how can you build STRABITs in your child's life to lessen some of the anxiety or poor understanding, difficulty getting started, some planning problems, or not recognizing the importance of things that often are the root cause of procrastination? And if anyone has any really good tips that they use for STRABITs in their life or in their child's life, maybe we can share them at the end. Another way I like to think about work and cognitive flexibility is effort strategies. Not everything you do requires the same amount of effort. That's unsustainable. And in the case of assignments with your child, I like to frame it this way. You have 4 options. Turn something in on time that you have adequately planned and executed. You thought about what the assignment was, the prompt, the project, and you thought about how long it was going to take you. You started early, you stayed on time, and you turned it in on time. Number 1. That's an ideal scenario, but often we don't get that, and that's okay. Number 2 is turning something in on time that you've not planned or executed well, so it's rushed. But you hope that turning it in on time gives you extra cushion, and that maybe your teacher is not that much of a difficult grader, won't notice that you rushed it, and you'll still get full credit. That's the best case scenario, right? I have a lot of students that I work with default to number 2. Number 3 is turn something in late, but you finish it very well to compensate it for being late. This one is a good strategy, but I also think that communicating ahead of time with the teacher is probably better, and asking for an extension if possible, right? And the fact that your students engaging to their full capacity with the work is also a good sign that they're more likely to retain that work rather than rushing through it. But, it still might get marked for being late. Number 4, I often see with students an academic crisis, or students who are really not doing great in their classes. They're not understanding what they're doing, and they have a lot of missing work. Number 4 states that it's not acceptable to turn something in late that is not quality, right? If it's late and it's rushed, it's probably not a good combination, unless it's very overdue. You have a fat 0, and something is better than nothing. I have some students that, they are a little bit perfectionistic. They hold on to these assignments till they think they want to make it perfect. It's already so overdue, months overdue, month overdue. At that point, it's best to just show the teacher what you got. See if you can get 1 point or 2 points for it, right? And so having your child begin to think like this on this sort of scale of options of what they can do for their academic work is encouraging a great amount of executive functioning in the planning and prioritization stage, the organization stage, and also the self-monitoring stage, right? Because you have to be self-aware to think about, how much time do I really have to do this assignment? Am I feeling 100% myself in terms of my health or energy levels? How do I want to approach this going forward? So those are some effort strategies to take home with you. Going back to thinking about that before, during, and after component of work for your child, right, is thinking about productivity methods. And I use these cute little visuals. It's a frog and a tadpole, and it's called Swallow the Frog, Catch the Tadpole. Swallow the Frog actually is from a Mark Twain quote, and it describes a scenario where you got dared to swallow 2 frogs. It's a strange scenario, right? Probably not going to happen. But in this scenario, you have to swallow 2 frogs in one day. And you have this choice between these 2 frogs who are not the same size. Are you going to swallow the big frog, or are you going to swallow the small frog? And social scientists have actually researched this phenomenon, and people over and over again affirm that if you have a big task that you have on your plate, it's probably better to do the bigger one first. It's more ideal. It's best to get the worst thing over with and done, so that anything after that seems more feasible. So if in the case you ever get dared to swallow 2 frogs in one day, one's bigger, one's smaller, go with the bigger one first and the smaller one after. This translates to students, they have multiple things that they have to do. Instead of doing the easier things and then procrastinating the bigger thing at the end of the day, start with the bigger thing, chip away at it, and then move to the smaller things. However, life doesn't exist in a vacuum. And so sometimes Swallow the Frog would not work for you for one reason or another. It really, your child's just at a standstill. They just can't motivate themselves to do it. That's when I encourage students to do catch the tadpole method. Catch the tadpole is the exact opposite. It's called behavioral momentum. You want to gain momentum into that larger project that you have to do by doing smaller things first. This is great if you've budgeted enough time to complete that big assignment at the end of the day or that big chore at the end of the day. But you might have a little bit of a problem if you started doing all these smaller tasks and put off your big task, and you find yourself later in the day not having it completed. But I think that both of these have a great place in how we think about the things that we have to do. They're different. They kind of give you a different type of energy when you do them. And it's a good thing to introduce. I especially like introducing this with visuals when I am talking about it with younger children. And so when you have access to these slides in this presentation, feel free to take a little screenshot and you can print it out. The last before our work productivity method is a time management matrix, and this is thinking about mainly prioritization. This is also called an Eisenhower matrix for planning. And so you would have your child sort maybe their homework or chores into these categories of important and urgent, important and not urgent, not important, urgent, and not important, not urgent. And that also frames a way for you to think about the tasks that your family has to do and that your child has to do. During our work for productivity methods, I really enjoy something called Pomodoro technique. And this is for students who might have some time blindness, or they might not understand or be able to really sense how much time has passed with something. The Pomodoro method is very simple. You choose a task and then you set a timer for 25 minutes and do work straight through. This can be scaled up or scaled down depending on your child's age. It doesn't have to be 25 minutes. But you do the amount of work for that set time. It's a great way to also work on attention span. And then you take a short break of 5 to 10 minutes after. I like to do 5 to 10 minutes for my older students. If it's a smaller initial step of the Pomodoro, instead of 25, you can do 3 minutes or so. And then after you take that break, the key is you transition back to work. And so this is a great way to work that transition and shifting muscle if your student really struggles with that. And you can repeat that as many times as you need to finish the task. So that's a great during our work productivity method. After our work, it's really important to have students reflect and have students reflect on their effort strategy. Those were the ones that I covered earlier. There was 4 of them. Turn your work in on time, do it well, turn your work in on time, but it's rushed. Those ones. Effort strategy. So what effort strategy did they use? What were their priorities? And time estimations. So if they thought the homework or the chore was going to take them 30 minutes, but it took them 4 hours, that's not accurate time estimation. And we want to make sure that we understand that when we don't understand, we want to make sure that we understand when we don't understand how much time something's going to take us. That affects other people in our lives. That affects our ability to plan out our day. And it's really important to continuously do this. You don't have to do this on an everyday scenario, but once a week, I think it's good to check in and check in with your child to see how their triangle of time estimation, priorities, and effort strategy is going. And again, yes, it harkens back to the effort strategies that I mentioned earlier. One thing that I want to offer you all that I'll send to the administrators is a take-home tool that I use. This is probably best for older students, maybe a particularly motivated older elementary school student could use something like this. But I've found that having students fill this out before even starting their work, thinking about their priorities for that day, the task list, often sandwiching a reward at the end. This is not a new iPhone. This is 5 extra minutes on a gaming console, or maybe if they did it for 5 days in a row, ice cream over the weekend. But this features outlines of priorities, a task list, a study schedule, some productivity methods, effort strategies, and like I mentioned, that reward system. It's good to get your thoughts out of your head and onto paper. I will give this to the administrators for you to download as you please. Our parting questions that we have that I hope everyone can answer at this point is, why does cognitive flexibility, flexible thinking, why does it matter? And 2, what is one area that you can either improve your own cognitive flexibility in or your child's? Number 3 is, what is one strategy to create more flexible thinking for your child, yourself, or your home in general? And asking yourself these questions often, because our answers change. With that being said, I wanted to say thank you. We'll enter into the questions component. I want to again touch upon the Center for Developing Minds. We're located in Los Gatos. We're an interdisciplinary medical clinic. We have developmental and behavioral pediatricians, neuropsychologists, therapists, educational specialists, and we're a really awesome interdisciplinary team and here to help you if you ever need it. I'm really excited to answer any questions now. Let's see if we have any. So I think I said earlier, we don't have access to a chat. So let's do this. If you have a question, we'll use the reactions button of raising your hand. We'll see that you raised your hand, and then we can either ask you to unmute. I don't know. Yeah, I think we have to ask you to unmute. We'll call out your name, and then you can ask your question, and I'll see if it's something that I can answer. Let's check.
I just want to say thank you so much for that, Caitlin. I really appreciate it. And I will help you look and see if anybody has any questions for you.
Thank you, Zoe. Christopher. All right, I'm going to ask you to unmute, Christopher. I don't know if it's sent. Let's see. Any notification popping up on your end, Christopher? I asked to unmute, I think multiple times, so I don't know if that's popping up as a notification on your side.
Sunny, I'm looking for him too to see if I can unmute him, and I'm not seeing him. I do see his hand up though. Oh, let's see. Here we go. Let's try this.
Thank you all for your Zoom patience that I'm pretty sure we've all developed at this point. So yeah, thank you.
Are you there, Christopher?
Everyone should be able to unmute themselves.
Also,
well, oh, Sean also has a question. Let's see if we can ask. Wait, I thought I heard maybe Christopher unmuted himself too. I don't know. Sean, we'll try to have you unmute and then see how that goes, and then we'll come back to Christopher if possible.
I also wanted to let everyone know too, they can always reach out to Sonda or myself with any other questions, and I will see if we can contact Caitlin and get an answer for you, or any resources or put you in contact with Caitlin and her agency.
Great. Sean, it looks like you're unmuted.
Okay, testing.
All good.
Excellent. All right, Caitlin, first of all, thank you for this conversation. I'm a principal of a middle school here in Pacific Grove, and I could not help but reflect on my own learning as an adult with some of the things that you're discussing, and so that was insightful. But I'm wondering what kind of work you guys have done with schools to kind of help partner with your efforts with parents. I'm looking more for, is there any way that the schools, so we are a 6-8 and we're fed by 2 elementary schools. And so we've had some bumpy transitions as far as grade 5 going to grade 6. And so I'm wondering if there's anything that you worked with as far as kind of helping schools kind of join hands with parents in this effort.
Yeah, well, the first thing that I've found through being a researcher at Stanford is making sure there's continuity of curriculum, often social emotional or executive functioning curriculum between the 5th grade and that first introduction to middle school, the 6th grade. So using the same verbiage or vocabulary at the different sites has increased access to either social emotional vocabulary or executive functioning knowledge. In terms of our agency, I would say we often do contracts with schools to either provide trainings for educators directly. We've presented in front of, for instance, all of like Los Gatos, Saratoga educators. And then we could also get information from you about some of the more specific things that you're seeing and converse, often bringing in some of our therapists as well to work with students who might be struggling in this area. I hope that answered your question. So I contract presentation to educators and then making sure that there's some sort of curriculum alignment between that 5th and 6th grade touch points.
Yeah, and I think, and you did answer the question, thank you. And I would like to know a little bit more information on that, but we can do that at another time. But so that really kind of demands that the elementary and middle schools really kind of closely articulate with one another to make that a little bit easier. And I know there is not that continuity as far as curriculum is concerned, but I'm sure there's other factors that we can do to help ease the transition between grade 5 and grade 6.
Absolutely. I've seen some sort of kind of study skills, executive functioning, curriculum deployed into that study hall or homeroom often is another way to do it. But let's touch base after. And I know Christopher's been waiting to ask this question, so I want to make sure I get to it. But great meeting you, Sean.
Hi, Caitlin. Sorry about that. This is Jessica on Christopher's Mac, which it was not allowing me to unmute, even though I was getting the notifications. But anyway, but here I am. A quick question for you. Thank you so much for this presentation. Can you talk a little bit about what you see in terms of how this manifests differently by gender?
Yeah. So I think that as a society, this is my personal opinion, and also there's some research-backed evidence that we put a little bit more pressure on girls to have stronger executive functioning skills. And this often translates into our clinic and also any autism research center, that the girls are able to mask and not be diagnosed for some of these learning differences because they've found ways to camouflage themselves or take the skills that they see other people do and do them themselves, right? And that's because there's a little bit more pressure to be able to plan and prioritize and take care of yourself. I think that's just might be a little bit of a societal norm. In terms of true gender difference, I wouldn't say that there's too much a biological level that I've experienced. I do think that boys often struggle a little bit more with the physical organization of things I've seen. But, you know, across the domains of that shifting and categorizing and inhibiting, I would say it's pretty equal. And doesn't look too different. Does that answer your question? Do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I mean, I just think in terms of exactly what you said, but whatever the reasons, if there is successful masking more successfully for girls, it might be harder to spot, it might be harder to see, right? It might take longer, it might not manifest as quickly or as obviously, but then also, yeah, just curious whether or not there is any like practical, regardless of what the reasons are, we can't change the social structures in the immediate sense. So how are things manifesting? Like what trends do you see for those of us who have girls, boys, and both, like different things we would maybe notice at different times because of those differences, regardless of where they come from?
Yeah, so I guess how I think about this is when parents come to me, especially with boys, and they say that they're getting all of these messages from their teacher that there's these certain behaviors. More often, I see some sort of physicality or verbal or physical aggression with boys. So trying to target that might be one area that you would want to focus on if that's a problem with your child. And thinking about that is really in the realm of impulse control, and how are we going to make sure that our child has a drop down menu, just like a channel changer, of options of things that they can do instead of that specific impulsive behavior. For girls, I really want to focus on building self-esteem and self-confidence, because I see a little bit more of internalizing behavior there than this externalizing behavior that I saw with the boys. And so with internalizing behavior, making sure that students know that their family's there to support them. One, that they're not stupid or struggling because something's hard. And making sure that you're utilizing across the board for both scenarios all the resources that you have. I advise parents always to see what you can get through your school district first before pursuing outside services. In the case of psychoeducational testing and things like that, it's not always the case that you can get school services, so you might have to supplement otherwise. But I think that making sure that your child feels supported in either scenario is the most important.
That's super helpful. Thank you. And I think just even knowing that we can tie things like the verbal and physical outward facing aggression to executive functioning, similarly some of the internalizing, whatever the gender, but there are some trends. But that even just for you to confirm that those are things that are tied to this exec functioning, like it's not just the straight up, like, have you done your homework?
Exactly.
It shows up in a lot of different ways. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Of course. Any other questions?
Thank you so much, Caitlin, for being here. Doesn't look like any other hands are up.
No worries. Well, I have so enjoyed speaking to you all. I hope that you were able to get a little bit of more knowledge about this subject, some tidbits and tools. I know it was fast, so I really highly encourage you to see this recording and kind of digest this at your own pace and think about how you can implement some of these things in your own home. And this was an academic lens, I want to just say, but executive functioning applies outside of the academic lens as well. It's in the home life, if it's in the social life, it's in the, personal, emotional life. And so when you start building, even in the academic context, some of these skills, you'll see improvement in those areas as well. And often academics is one of the easiest ways to first gain traction in this area. You can also do this, through your child's extracurricular activities, right? But academics is probably the easiest way to begin introducing some of these topics.
I have one quick question, Caitlin, since we have just a few minutes. When it comes to age, and I have a daughter that's in early adolescence, what do you expect to see from, let's say, that 5th grade level all the way through? Like, what are some of the I'm sure there's more to it than that, but some of the changes we can expect through the years?
How Dr. Korb describes it, he's the director of the Center for Developing Minds. He also has a really great book called Raising an Organized Child that I'll shamelessly plug because I think it's a great book. But how he describes it is as when your child's very young in early elementary school, you're kind of a position-specific coach. You are involved in almost every aspect of their life to the utmost degree, right? So as they get older, you're going to move from this very specialized type coach to a more general manager role. You're not necessarily in charge of exactly how they do the things they do, but you're going to give them some advice. You're going to coach them. And I would say from my experience as an educator, around 4th grade, 3rd grade is when you really want to begin to give your child a little bit more space and agency over their work. And by high school, they should be doing work independently without you. I have a lot of parents from students. I work with some high flyer achieving students and some students who are really struggling in the school system. And there's a lot of instinct on the parents end to swoop in and save your child, especially when they're failing. And sometimes I have to give the advice dependent on the scenario to say, we have to allow the child to learn how to fail, because sometimes that is the biggest motivation to do better. That's in the case of older students, I'd say. From that lens of 8th grade and 6th and 8th grade, I would say that you want them to be working independently. You will probably need to check in to make sure that they have things done multiple times a day. But at the end of the day, we want to be taking a step back and away from going through their things and making sure everything is done. And, this at that point too, some of the behavior that I see come up is that kind of lying behavior or guttural reaction to say, yeah, I finished it. It's not actually finished. If that's the scenario that you're working with, I advise coming up with some sort of contract with your student, right? That you have a certain expectation. Your student knows you have that expectation. And then after a certain amount of weeks, you check in. Oh, you said that everything was done, but I see that you have 5 missing assignments. What are we going to do now? And I think also if your student struggles with any sort of learning difference, being in communication with their teaching team is super important.
I really appreciate that answer. And I like the way you described all those different ages, and the 3rd and 4th grade kind of being a transitional time to allow a little bit more independence. I think it's great for parents to know that, because sometimes we really don't, we're just not sure. Maybe we had really hands-off parents, so we don't really know the balance of being involved and also, allowing them to have some autonomy. So I appreciate that answer. Thanks so much.
Of course.
All right.
It looks like we're at time, or almost at time. I don't see any more hands. So I just want to say thank you all so much for tuning in and listening. It's been great presenting to you all. I hope that you found something useful. And I hope that whether you're transitioning, I'm not sure if you guys just went on your ski break or have spring break upcoming, but I wish you all the best in the rest of the school year.
Yay. Thank you so much. Again, have a lovely rest of your week. And thanks everybody for attending and learning and being there for your students. Thank y'all. Have a great
Thank
night.
you. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
Oh, there's Gretchen.
All right. People are leaving. I'm going to click leave here.
All right.
Awesome.
Well,
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Sonda, I can send you that handout that I had on one page.
Thank you
if-
so much. That was a really good one. I like that.
Yeah, yeah, if parents want to use that. And then I'll send you the link to Dr. Korb's book too, if that's something that you think parents might be interested in.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Absolutely.
Well, you two ladies have a really good night. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank
Thank
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. All right. Bye, Sonda.
Okay, bye. I'll talk to you later. Thank you for being here. Oh.
Yes, of course.